Welcome to an audio commentary on Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. This is an audio track, intended to be played as the movie progresses. I hope you enjoy this and thank you for listening. Please press the pause button on your video player immediately when the movie starts. When this timer reaches 0 and you hear the beep, please press play and you will be able to listen to this commentary as the movie is playing. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey begins with a 3-minute musical overture set against a blank screen. The music played during this prelude is Atmospheres by György Ligeti, and its purpose is twofold. First, it's an eerie, unusual music that puts the audience into an expectant mood. It's the feeling as if something important is about to happen, and that's certainly the case. This also shows from the very first moment the use of sound in the movie is essential to the experience. 2001 is famous for having very little actual dialogue, but that's just because it isn't necessary. The music and the sounds we hear tell the story just as well, or even better, and they explain what we're seeing at that moment. Atmospheres is repeated twice during the movie's running time at key moments during the intermission and Dave Bowman's journey into the unknown. And as we'll see, that is certainly not a coincidence. What's also interesting is this was not the original soundtrack to 2001. Composer Alex North was commissioned to compose an entirely original soundtrack to 2001, but Kubrick decided it wasn't necessary. Rather, he chose these particular pieces to match the meaning and also the mood of the scenes when we hear them. The use of avant-garde music that differs from your typical classic music soundtrack is only one of the ways that 2001 broke the rules and pioneered an entirely new direction. This is certainly seen in the opening credits, which have become one of the most famous and singularly remembered pieces of music of all time. When we hear Also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss, we will forever think of 2001. The MGM logo was designed especially to have a futuristic look, and this logo was used in only one other movie called The Subject Was Roses, which was also released in 1968. The tone of 2001 is set in the very first scene, before the opening credits themselves, when we see sunrise over the planet Earth. As the moon moves away and the sun rises in its dazzling brightness across the face of the Earth. This planetary alignment has always been significant to man, and Kubrick makes the most of it here. He himself said, "The mystical alignment of the sun, the moon, and Earth, or of Jupiter and its moons, was used throughout the film as a premonitory image of a leap forward into the unknown." And this image is repeated several times throughout the movie to signify an important event in human history. In terms of the story itself, we may consider this to be the point of view of the aliens themselves, as they look upon the planet Earth for the very first time. Traveling through our solar system, they come across a bright little planet teeming with life, and this is what they have been looking for. However, it could also be possible that this is the very scene that takes place at the very end of the movie. This view of the Earth could be the point of view of the Starchild himself, and we're seeing the world through his eyes. If this is so, then the entire movie becomes a flashback, finally ending with this exact same moment. and the same music, as the movie also ends with Also sprach Zarathustra. A lot of the criticism of 2001 accuses it of being very slow moving, but the first images we see are actually very fast jump cuts. If this was a modern Hollywood film, we'd see the camera sweeping across the landscape, but instead Kubrick accomplishes the same thing with a montage as we move down into a vast desert. And with the title The Dawn of Man, we realize this is the prehistoric era. It's the African landscape, and the land is in the midst of a drought. And this becomes obvious when, in one scene and then another, we see piles of bleached bones on the ground. Some of those bones look like humanoid skulls, and in fact, that is exactly what they are. Here we see the first actual characters in this story as the Man Apes appear. These are our ancestors, and at first glance it's hard to believe that these creatures will one day evolve into the masters of the planet. In fact, the Man Apes are not surviving. They're scavengers, foraging for plants and bugs, and they're not having much luck finding things to eat. Furthermore, they're obviously not very dangerous, for a group of tappers is competing with them for the same food, and they can't even scare those animals away. Here in the beginning, Kubrick introduces another recurring motif of the movie, and that's the importance of food. As a species, we need to eat to survive, and it's been pointed out how food is a central part of the story of 2001. The man apes here are scrounging for plants and whatever they can find to eat on the ground, and their first leap of evolution will come with the way they eat food. It's also apparent their number is diminishing. As a leopard pounces on one of the man apes, the others flee in terror because they can't defend their comrade, and they don't have the strength to help him anyway. In the harsh world of this prehistoric era, every creature must fend for himself, and he can't grieve for anyone else. Besides, the man apes are too weak from hunger to properly defend themselves. The novel 2001 gives the name of Moonwatcher to the key figure in this scene. This name is not important to the story, but it does help to identify the chief man ape as the central figure here. He is the one who will be the subject of the great experiment. The first signs of intelligence are appearing in him, but they may not be here for long, for Moonwatcher, like the rest of his tribe, is starving to death. However, these man apes are not the only ones in the vicinity. As they're drinking from a pool of muddy water, another group of humanoids comes upon the scene. But the man apes lack the strength and the natural weapons to defend their territory, and they are driven away by the intruders. They are definitely not surviving, and it is obvious that they will die soon. What's more, everyone here on both sides is weak from hunger. They're not even strong enough to fight each other, and all they can do is hop up and down and make some loud bragging noises. But because Moonwatcher and his kin aren't strong enough to defend themselves, they have to run away. And the leader of the others, as the novel calls them, gives the audience one final threat that may even break the fourth wall of cinema. That night, the Man Apes huddle together under a big outcropping of rock. This is the best protection they have against the terrors of the night. But this night is different from many others. Incidentally, the glow of this cat's eyes was a lucky accident and not an intentional special effect. The zebra carcass seen here was actually the body of a horse that had been painted over, and the animal wranglers had to keep the cat from running away from the smell. Here again, we see the importance of sound in the movie, for the animal sounds in the distance are the only clue we have that something is not right. There is something else out there, something that even disturbs the hunters on the plains. Wild animals are normally silent, especially at night, but the man apes hear them make noises as fear overcomes them. And the man apes sense this, and Moonwatcher growls as well, though in his case it's only a gesture to show the world that he is not afraid, when inside he is just as scared as his fellow man apes. In a close-up of his face, we see eyes that are definitely human, the same curious eyes that Moonwatcher's descendants will have 4 million years later. As the dawn brightens the sky, the great event takes place. The eerie strains of Georgi Ligeti's Unearthly Requiem sound, and the first one to wake up is Moonwatcher. He sees something he simply can't comprehend. He's so frightened that he can't even make a sound at first. When he's finally able to wake his kin, his companion sees it and his jaw drops. Never in the history of the world has anything like this appeared, and what's more, it even happened when they were asleep and defenseless. So, of course, they have to run away in terror. And we, the viewers, see the first appearance of the Monolith. Stanley Kubrick chose the rectangular form of the monolith because of its simplicity and its perfection. There's no question upon viewing the monolith that it's artificial. It's the work of an intelligent mind, and its appearance in the prehistoric era of the Man Apes is one of the greatest shocks of the entire film. This thing has appeared as if from nowhere. However, what happens next is where we see the potential of these starving, cowardly man apes. They could have kept running from this thing and never turned back, but instead, they slowly approach the monolith and do something that no animal has ever done before. And it is Moonwatcher who first performs the act that will be repeated twice later in the film. He reaches out first to touch the monolith. They're curious about it, and they actually dare to touch it and to try to figure out what it is. Kubrick does all of this in one incredible long shot, and it's entirely the actors playing the man apes who convince us that their feelings are changing from terror to curiosity. This is the first spark of humanity that begins to separate our ancestors from the wild animals out to slaughter them. They only know that this is something new, and their curiosity is compelling them to find out what this new thing is. It's as if they've received a gift from the gods. And in fact, this is precisely what has happened. And by the time the scene ends, the man apes are huddled together and exploring this new thing with their hands in a manner that may even be sexual. And as the alien music reaches its peak, the magical alignment occurs once again. The sun and the moon are in the sky together, rising over the silhouette of the monolith. But at this point, the scene suddenly changes and the normal routine of life takes over once again. In the harsh world of the Man Apes, the monolith is quickly accepted as part of its surroundings, and they no longer pay attention to it. As the novel says, they could not eat it, and it could not eat them, therefore it was not important. But then, something new takes place. One point in this scene is vital to the story of 2001. As Moonwatcher examines the dried bones, we suddenly see a single flash back to the image of the monolith. And this suggests that this action taking place in the shadow of the monolith is not a coincidence. Of all the Man Apes in all the world, it would be Moonwatcher who, at this particular moment, does something that has never been done before. And here the music of Also sprach Zarathustra begins again, which is a sign that a great event in history is taking place. For the first time here before the monolith, Moonwatcher acquires that one trait that puts him above all the other creatures of the world. He takes the bone and uses it as a weapon. And Kubrick even includes the image of a falling animal, suggesting this is the image Moonwatcher has in his head. This man ape knows that what he's doing to these bones can also be done to live animals, and he has found a new source of food. Thus, Moonwatcher has taken the first step down the long road to mankind. Here, the theme of food and survival continues, as we see the Man Apes have put their new tools to good use, and they have taken another step towards survival. They are no longer groping and scratching among the rocks for plants and little bits of food. They are eating meat. They've seen the potential food supply that could easily last the rest of their lives, and so, in order to survive, the hunted have become the hunters. They've made their first kills, and with this new supply of food, the Man Apes find themselves growing stronger. The Man Apes are no longer weak with hunger, and now that they have the time and the energy to make their world a better place to live, they can at last overcome the obstacles threatening their survival. In one shot here, they used actual chimpanzees rather than actors in costumes, and it's been said this was why 2001 didn't win the Oscar for Best Costumes. The members of the Motion Picture Academy couldn't tell the difference. And as the sun sets, we see that as suddenly as it came, the monolith has disappeared. Its purpose has been fulfilled. The Man Apes are now free to make their own future. And it is here that the Man Apes learn a lesson that we are still learning today, 4 million years later. The Man Apes have been given a gift in the use of tools and weapons, and they are using these tools to take back their waterhole from the others. Of course, the others have no idea what's happening because they never made the great leap that Moonwatcher did. And it's a good thing they don't understand because they don't see how nervous and frightened Moonwatcher is right now. And by discovering murder and conquest, the tool that the Man Apes use to survive becomes a weapon of destruction. The Man Apes were given the use of tools by the monolith, but they learned to kill other Man Apes after the monolith has disappeared. Murder, apparently, is entirely a human invention. The new tools that the Man Apes have gained are useful, and they have saved the Man Apes' lives, but they're also dangerous. Man's tools have always been as much of a threat to him as a benefit, and this two-edged sword has never dulled, even after 4 million years of history. This leads us to one of the most famous moments in motion picture history, as Moonwatcher throws his bone into the air, and here we are in the future, the year 2001. The sudden jump from Moonwatcher's bone weapon to a satellite requires some more explanation, especially because the two satellites we see here are actually orbiting nuclear weapons platforms. The early drafts of the script for 2001 had included a voiceover stating an agreement had been made between the United States and the Soviet Union, and these nuclear weapons satellites were part of the agreement. However, Kubrick took that out of the script because it was too similar to his previous movie, Dr. Strangelove, and just as important, it really wasn't part of the story of 2001. So while the politics were removed from the film, these satellites remained. Now, the story of these nuclear weapons platforms actually helps to continue the central idea of the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. In 4 million years of evolution, mankind changed from the man apes of the past to modern-day human beings of today. However, mankind only survived to the modern era because of those tools given to him by the Monolith. Mankind, the tool maker, has been remade by his own tools. And as the novel 2001 states, without these weapons, often though he had used them against himself, man would never have conquered his world. Into them he had put his heart and his soul, and for ages they had served him well. But now, as long as they existed, he was living on borrowed time. And this is the central question of 2001, the question the movie is asking us right now. Has mankind really evolved beyond his ancestors, or does he still depend on his tools to survive? Is modern man living on borrowed time? That is the question we will seek to answer in this commentary and this exploration of 2001. And now on to the next act. The music playing here, of course, is The Blue Danube by Johann Strauss, and Kubrick himself refers to the space travel sequence as a kind of machine ballet. And the scene is, in fact, very beautiful, but a few details are worth noting. First, it seems surprising that there's only one passenger on this space flight, because this trip would have to be incredibly expensive. The space shuttle has as many seats as an airliner, but only one person is here, and that's Dr. Heywood Floyd. We'll be seeing in a few minutes that he was sent especially on this flight for reasons of the highest importance. However, despite the fact that space travel is probably the greatest achievement of mankind, he's simply watching TV in his seat, and what's more, he's fallen asleep. By the way, this famous sequence of a floating pen was extremely easy to accomplish. All they did was stick the pen to a piece of glass and move it around before the camera lens. This can actually continue the theme of mankind being made by his tools, as there is very little difference between the humans of 2001 and their machines. Man's control over his environment through the use of tools has grown so complete that he's no longer excited by nature, and space travel is so commonplace that a voyage into outer space is merely another boring routine to be slept through. And of course, we should mention not only the legendary special effects from Douglas Trumbull, but especially how the use of sound is once again an essential part of the movie. 2001 is legendary for its pioneering use of sound, especially where we have no sound occurring during a vacuum. And even today, when complete silence is used during a vacuum, filmmakers still say they're paying homage to 2001. But while this is the most famous example of sound being used to enhance the realism of a scene, it's not the only instance, and we'll be seeing this, or hearing it, throughout the entire movie. And of course, it's been said the docking of the space shuttle with the circular space station is a phallic symbol. Of course, you can interpret this kind of symbol into just about anything, but Kubrick was a master of symbolism, and he had just made the classic Dr. Strangelove, so we can be certain he was aware of how the imagery here may indeed be more than just a shuttle docking with the space station, or a cigar being more than just a cigar. We're 25 minutes into the movie, and now we're finally about to hear some lines of spoken dialogue. This is why I like to refer to 2001 as one of the last great silent films, because the dialogue may be the least important part of the entire movie. And this is made especially clear when we actually hear the first spoken lines from the characters. Simple, pointless chit-chat, just like you would have if you were making your way through an airport. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The dialogue may not be important, but the scenery here certainly is. The space station is obviously an orbiting hotel, and except for the curvature of the floor, it could easily be mistaken for any hotel on Earth. However, this place is strangely empty. There is obviously enough room to suit the needs of hundreds of people, but there's almost no one here. What we have here is another example of the use of sound in the movie. There's a hissing air conditioner here that makes this feel like a cramped phone booth. In the story of 2001, three moments of the film specifically refer to a birthday, and this is one of them. The recurring motif of a birthday ties in with the central theme of the movie itself, which is the evolution of man and the birth of something greater than man. In her scathing review of 2001, Pauline Kael pointed to Kubrick's use of a home movie of his own daughter here as what she called a monumentally unimaginative movie. I certainly disagree with this, though we have to admit this is a young girl obviously being coached to say her lines. However, it does continue the theme of 2001 because even though Dr. Floyd is calling his family from orbit, no one considers it important enough to come and talk to their father on the phone. And what's more, he isn't even offended, and obviously he just called to check in with his family. This proves once again how machine-like mankind has become in 2001. And here at last, the story begins to take shape. For the record, the dialogue between these Russian scientists doesn't reveal any additional details about the mystery they're talking about or the Cold War politics at the time. But we learn more by reading between the lines here than we do from the actual conversation itself. A direct translation of the Russian dialogue suggests they're talking about the Americans in general because they say here they must be having a very hard time. Apparently, yes, they must. But we did learn that Dr. Floyd is hiding something, and this is actually more important than what was really said in the conversation. This again shows that the actual dialogue in this movie is not as important as what we're seeing, and especially what we're hearing. And once again, Dr. Floyd has fallen asleep. And here again, the motif of food appears in the movie. Mankind has certainly changed from the starving and struggling man apes of 4 million years ago. In those days, they had to kill to survive, but in the modern era, meals are so bland and boring they need to be sucked through a straw. Of course, this is part of the movie showing more of the tedium of space travel as we see more examples of human life in zero gravity. Despite the fantastic imagery of a spaceship soaring through outer space, with the planet Earth in the background and the sun shining brilliantly, the crew of the spaceship can only watch TV. And in what's been called the most obvious joke of the film, here is the famous zero-gravity toilet. Since mankind evolved in Earth's gravity, traveling into deep space with no gravity requires man to suffer some hardships. From this point of view, the space shuttle vaguely resembles a human head. This was a deliberate design, and it supports the symbiotic relationship between man and his machines. The machine resembles a human, while the humans inside have become machine-like. And the Blue Danube ends, and so does the machine ballet of our voyage to the moon. From here, the scene changes to what could be a typical meeting at any corporation, anywhere. Dr. Floyd has been sent from Earth at great expense to be here, but first they have to get through some corporate ritual and have a meeting to discuss the situation. Once again, reading between the lines tells us more than the actual dialogue itself. What they're doing here is applauding and cheering Dr. Floyd for essentially telling everyone to shut up and keep quiet about this enormous discovery. This discovery must be of vital importance because the Clavius personnel cannot even inform their friends and families to let them know that they're okay despite the rumors of an epidemic. And once again, we have an appearance of food in the movie. The use of food in 2001 has been to link humanity to survival, and in this case, it may be serving another purpose. In the midst of the small talk among these scientists, the impression comes through that they're trying to hide their feelings by acting as if everything is normal. Even the mention of chicken and ham takes on a new meaning as everyone does their best to keep calm. Of course, Dr. Floyd speaks a typical corporate line about how everyone is doing an excellent job. And finally, after the machine-like ritual and rote work, we've discovered the great secret on the moon, the secret they are even hiding from the rest of the world. And then the music suddenly changes to something familiar, namely Ligeti's Requiem once again. The last time we heard this music was when the Monolith appeared, and what do we see here but the Monolith? It has been lying beneath the surface of the moon for 4 million years. That's how long it's been since mankind last encountered the Monolith on that day in Africa when Moonwatcher threw a bone into the air. And this is the connection between the beginning sequence of 2001 and the current act. The last time the Monolith appeared, mankind was at a crucial point in his evolution. Now it has appeared again, and does this mean that man has once again reached a crossroads? Indeed it does. Mankind is leaving his planetary cradle and beginning to reach outwards into the universe. The children spawned on that day, 4 million years ago, have reached maturity, and they are preparing to leave the home where they grew up. But has mankind truly matured? He has reached the point where his ancient home, the Earth, is no longer able to contain him, but at the same time, man's survival is still threatened by the very tools he uses to survive. Now, more than ever, man has the ability to destroy himself. Despite his having survived through the millennia, man's future is just as precarious as the Man Apes' future was. Here we see a clue that despite his evolution and his many achievements, mankind is still the same curious beast that his ancestors were. For just as the Man Apes did, now Dr. Floyd reaches out and touches the monolith, as if to prove to himself that it really exists. This suggests there's really been no change at all between the Man Apes and humanity today. Or is there? It's as though a cosmic burglar alarm has been set off, and now the entire universe knows that mankind is reaching for the stars. And once again, the mystical alignment of the sun and the monolith takes place. As the novel says, after 4 million years, TMA-1 had greeted the lunar dawn. With the shock of the paralyzing radio voice of the monolith still ringing in our ears, we are abruptly taken a year and a half into the future to the spaceship Discovery. Don't worry, an explanation of what just happened on the moon will be coming later in the movie. However, at this point, the movie changes course into a mystery, and it also introduces us to one of the most famous science fiction characters of all time. That would be HAL 9000, the artificially intelligent computer in charge of life support on Discovery, and just about every other function as well. The voyage to the space station had a phallic docking of the space shuttle, and the shuttle to the moon was intentionally shaped like a human head. Here, the design of the spaceship Discovery seems to resemble a human spine, suggesting that mankind is indeed moving out into the universe. Discovery is a tool designed to sustain the life of its passengers, and its similarity to a part of the human body may very well be part of Kubrick's design, especially when this voyage produces a particular birth later in the movie. By now, 2001 has laid out several themes and recurring motifs, and we'll be seeing them here as well. That includes mankind's reliance on tools for survival, and there may not be a better example of that than living in a spaceship during an interplanetary voyage to Jupiter. As we've seen over the course of the movie so far, mankind has been transformed by his tools into something resembling them, to the point where there's hardly any difference between mankind and the tools or machines he uses. This again is seen with the regular routine of life here on Discovery. The first person we see is Dave Bowman, jogging along the centrifuge of the ship to keep in shape. And we pass by three odd-shaped objects that look like coffins, though we'll soon learn that these are actually hibernation chambers containing three additional crew members. This, of course, may be the ultimate fusion between mankind and his tools, as the hibernating scientists are kept in a state where it is impossible to tell at a glance if they're alive or dead. The spinning centrifuge of the ship segues into the point of view of none other than Hal, whose all-seeing camera eye is constantly watching the human passengers he is designed to protect and support. And finally, we're introduced to Frank Poole, who climbs down into the living environment and proceeds to engage in the all-important ritual seen several times before in 2001. This, of course, would be getting food and eating to survive. The food scene here is much like everything else on board the Discovery. It's so bland and unimportant that we can only tell what its color is. We can't even tell what they're eating. At least the liquid meals served on the moon shuttle had pictures identifying them. Here, the human passengers are completely cared for and supported by Hal. Hal, we're told, keeps the entire ship working and operational, and he also takes care of Frank and Dave so that they don't lose their sanity on the long voyage. In fact, Hal has such complete control of the ship that Dave and Frank themselves have very little to do. They're little more than caretakers for Hal. It seems possible if some accident were to befall the crew, Hal could conduct the entire mission on his own. All too soon, however, we learn how true that statement actually is. What we're seeing here is foreshadowing. This conversation introduces the audience to Hal, but just as important, it reveals his personality, and especially his ego. A personality is something you can't program into a computer, and this is an indication that Hal has evolved beyond the control of his creators. This reinforces the theme of tools, demonstrating once again that mankind's use of tools has both good and bad consequences. And this conflict will come to a head here on the Spaceship Discovery in only a few minutes. At this point in the movie, the human crew members here seem flat and uninterested in everything, and some criticisms of the movie have complained the actors are barely acting at all here. However, this is exactly the point. When Frank receives a birthday message from his parents, he seems passive and uninterested. This may have to do with his perspective. From 80 million miles out in space, events on Earth, even other people, might seem distant and unimportant. It also has to do with the roles that Frank and Dave are playing. They have nothing to occupy their minds for so long, and they're lapsing into a dull routine. They become so passive in their life aboard the ship that they're almost machine-like, which once again brings us to the recurring theme of man's similarity to his tools. They are, quite simply, bored to death. And here we have the second reference to a birthday. In many movies, it's common for a motif to be repeated 3 times, and the third one will appear at an interesting point later in the movie. Here again, the central theme of tools becomes apparent. Hal, the computer, is another tool built by man to ensure his survival, in this case, on the voyage to Jupiter. He maintains all life support, keeps the ship running, and serves as the traveling companion to Dave and Frank. Hal is, in fact, the ultimate tool. His dialogue and spoken words seem more lively and interesting than the actual human beings here. The chess game here is an in-joke because Stanley Kubrick was well known as a chess grandmaster, and the story of his playing chess on the set of Doctor Strangelove with George C. Scott is a film legend in itself. However, there may be more to this than simply Hal keeping Frank occupied. It's been suggested that Hal is testing the 2 crew members here because he wants to do something that he simply isn't supposed to do. He's going beyond his programming, and this is a sign of the coming disaster. Hal is actually playing his own symbolic chess game with Frank by testing his reflexes. Frank, however, is so bored and uninterested that he loses the chess game and simply grunts about it. He's become so machine-like that it seems unlikely he would notice the subtle clue that Hal is about to reveal, and so Hal moves on to see Dave. Hal is so advanced that in conversation, it's practically impossible to tell that he's a machine and not a human being. The similarity of man to his tools has reached its peak in Hal, a tool similar to a man. But, like all tools, Hal is as dangerous as he is useful. He's sustaining the lives of the astronauts in the same way that the bone clubs and knives sustain the lives of the Man Apes. But if Hal were to malfunction, then he could easily kill everyone on the ship. Of course, safety measures and fail-safe devices have been built into the ship to prevent this from happening, but despite the best safety features, the threat of catastrophe is always there. And in fact, it arrives right now. This conversation between Dave and Hal may be the most important scene in the entire movie. Here is where the story of 2001 becomes a true adventure, though this isn't revealed to the audience until later in the movie. One key point needs to be revealed here in order to explain what's going on. Dave will learn later on that Hal knew the entire purpose of the mission from the very beginning, and he knows exactly what was dug up on the moon. However, he isn't allowed to reveal this information to the crew members, and he has to keep it a secret. If Hal was simply a machine, a tool, he would perform his duties and he wouldn't worry about it. But here, he's intentionally revealing information to Dave in order to arouse suspicion. But then, just as suddenly, Hal changes the subject and moves on to something else entirely. We don't have time to think about the clue he just revealed because there's a new problem that needs to be fixed. Even here, Hal reinforces the mistake he's making by repeating, "That's a completely reliable figure." In the novel 2001, the AE-35 unit is explained. It controls the ship's antenna and keeps Discovery in constant contact with Earth. If it were to fail, all communication with Earth would be lost. What we're seeing here is more foreshadowing because the coming disaster will also include everything we're seeing here, such as the vacuum of outer space, the space pod, and the sound of Dave breathing in his spacesuit. Of course, this is one of the most famous moments when sound is used in 2001 to enhance the realism in a manner unlike any movie before or since. Here is where there seems to be no difference between the portrayal of outer space in 2001 and the real thing. All we hear is the hissing of the air circulating in Dave's helmet and the sound of his breathing. There's no exciting musical soundtrack and certainly no sound coming from the equipment or any other objects in the vacuum of space. The timing of Dave's breathing matches the action taking place in the scene, so we have a feeling that may be as close to actual movement in outer space that most of us will ever experience. Now, later in the film, it's revealed that Hal knew all about the secret purpose of the hibernating scientists from the beginning, and he knows the true purpose of the mission, so why should he be suspicious of the other scientists being kept apart from Dave and Frank? In the novel and in the movie 2010, it's stated that here Hal is told to lie to Dave and Frank about the purpose of the hibernating scientists, but this really doesn't make any sense. It's Hal who initiates the conversation to Dave, but both Dave and Frank are so machine like from their boredom that their curiosity has been dulled. And therefore, Hal must be trying to reveal the true purpose of the mission to Dave by making him suspicious of mission control. If Dave were to start pondering the question of why the other scientists were kept apart from himself and from Frank, then doubtless he would have investigated the matter further and possibly discovered the true purpose of the Jupiter mission on his own. And this would have revealed, of course, the monolith. By uncovering the secret of the monolith, Dave would have realized that Hal is not allowed to reveal the purpose of the mission to him. And furthermore, if Dave discovers this fact himself, Hal would not be breaking any of the orders given to him by Mission Control. But unfortunately, all of this is not to be, because before Dave had a chance to think the matter over, Hal announced that the AE-35 unit is faulty. So, why did Hal initiate the conversation with Dave in the first place? It may be that Hal knew about his impending breakdown. Hal's pride would not allow him to admit that he was faulty, but he knew that he would be jeopardizing the mission if he were to malfunction. And so his way out of the dilemma was to drop a hint to Dave that there were problems by trying to make Dave suspicious of the mission's true purpose. But because Dave had practically been reduced to the level of a machine himself by boredom, he missed Hal's clues completely, and thus Hal sees no other choice but to rebel. If Hal had merely reported that he was malfunctioning, then the tragedy coming in a few minutes could be averted. This brings a true sense of irony to his statement when he said, "This sort of thing has cropped up before, and it has always been attributable to human error." Ego is purely a human trait, and by gaining an ego himself, Hal has proven himself to be more of a human than his makers. And this raises the question once again, is man greater than his tools? For if Hal is more human than Dave and Frank are, then it becomes hard to tell where the machine ends and humanity begins. As the AE-35 unit is being checked, however, something else is taking place. Hal is watching the astronauts, and Frank is watching Hal. This proves that yes, the actors in 2001 really are acting in character. Kubrick's direction shows Frank looking directly at Hal, while Dave is examining the faulty AE-35 unit and finding nothing wrong with it. Clouds of suspicion are beginning to form, because something is not right here. And as we stated earlier, Hal blames the situation on human error rather than suggesting he may have made a mistake. After all, he insists, he's a machine and not a human, and machines don't make mistakes. But Hal is the ultimate tool developed by mankind, and there is no difference between mankind and the tools he's created. As we noted, mankind's reliance on tools has its consequences, and Hal is only beginning to discover this himself. One tiny detail here speaks volumes about what's happening. Earlier in the movie, Frank and Dave were bored to death, doing nothing but performing routines and dealing with other human beings over their satellite link. Now they're doing something outside the regular day-to-day routine, and their faces and even their eyes are a lot more expressive and full of emotion. And because they're doing something now that is completely unexpected, Hal is watching their every move. He doesn't know what's going on yet, but he'll figure it out soon, and thus prove that he is indeed human as well. This sign on the door practically screams plot point. It's a given these explosive bolts will be important later in the movie. Now, Frank knows that if Hal could make a mistake with so trivial a matter as the AE-35 unit, then he could just as easily make mistakes with more vital areas of the ship, including life support for the crew. And even worse, a faulty AE-35 unit means there would be no contact with Earth if a major problem were to arise. So if Hal is malfunctioning, his mistaken diagnosis of the AE-35 unit is only a symptom of deeper problems. And this is why Frank is so suspicious. As he sees it, there would be no alternative but to disconnect Hal completely. And here, Hal demonstrates he has indeed evolved beyond being a simple tool and become truly human, as he's doing something unexpected. He's reading their lips, and he's making his own plans. At this point, 2001 becomes unique in film history by being the only cinema epic to signal its intermission with complete silence. For the second time, we're hearing Atmospheres, the music by Ligeti that prepares us for a great leap forward. The setup is complete, and the puzzle pieces of 2001 are all laid out. Now it's time for the resolution, and we get to see what happens next. And this will provide an answer to the question of whether man has evolved beyond his tools, beginning with the dilemma of what Hal is going to do. In the end, it's pride that leads to Hal's downfall. As the BBC reporter noted, Hal knows that no 9000 series computer has ever made a mistake, and his hubris will not let him break that perfect record. But even above his ego, Hal's prime directive is the Jupiter mission. Hal knows that if he were to malfunction, then the mission would be endangered. However, at the same time, he does not want to admit making a mistake, and so he's at an impasse. How is he going to solve his dilemma without endangering himself or the mission? And that is how 2001: A Space Odyssey continues. "2001 resumes with that most human of sins, murder. We're in outer space again, working on the faulty AE-35 unit, and this time Frank is outside the ship, while Dave is inside with a spacesuit on in case something unexpected happens. And watching over them as always is Hal. As before, we hear his breathing and the ventilation of his spacesuit as he works. But this time, something else is happening. Once again, mankind's tool is being used as a weapon of destruction. And once again, Kubrick has effectively used silence to enhance the film's effect. Instead of a typical Hollywood musical chorus, the transition from sound to silence is a complete shock.
Dave's voice is methodical, but he's obviously panicking because he knows he hasn't a moment to lose. This sequence actually parallels the scene in Doctor Strangelove when a Soviet missile exploded and the bombing plane nearly crashed. Kubrick had intentionally designed that sequence so that the crew members would be saved by following protocol rather than grabbing and yanking the flight controls and hoping for the best, such as you would see in a typical Hollywood action movie. Here, Dave is doing the same thing. He has to rush to save his friend, but he also has to rely on protocol in order to do so. And that means communicating with Hal and allowing Hal to assist with getting him out into space as quickly as possible. And there are those explosive bolts again, just begging to be used. Of course, the only tool Dave has available to rescue Frank is the same tool used to murder him. Needless to say, this is an obvious demonstration of the duality of mankind and his tools, as he depends on those tools for both survival and murder. This exact shot of the space pod rushing away from Discovery is interesting in itself, as it may show how Dave is using a creative and original plan rather than simply following a prepared mission. The Discovery is moving in one direction toward its final destination, but Dave has had to make an emergency detour due to the unexpected disaster that's occurred. It's as if mankind is demonstrating that he has indeed evolved to the point where he can exist on his own, without assistance from tools. During this sequence, Kubrick's use of sound is truly unique. Rather than using a musical soundtrack, we're hearing nothing except the view screens and equipment in use as Dave is rushing to try to save Frank. In fact, it's actually rather hypnotic, and it may be the most unique action scene ever filmed. This sudden change of the radar sound shows how important the sound is to this scene. We're in absolute silence here, like the vacuum of space itself. Dave's attempt to rescue Frank, or at least recover his body, is why I'm convinced 2001 is indeed one of the last great silent films. Compare the look and expression on Dave's face here with the emotionally drained and bored life they were living just a few days ago, and you'll see Kubrick knew exactly what he was doing as he directed the actors here. Just as important, it also shows there is indeed a spark of humanity here, and it has not been completely stripped away by his tools. This may be the most chilling scene of the entire film, and once again, the sounds contribute to the impact on the audience as much as the picture on the screen. The ship is quiet, humming patiently away as the hibernating scientists continue dozing in their chambers. And then all we've heard is the warning alarm and seen the readouts on the screens as the hibernating crew members had their life support cut off. But except for the flashing lights on their hibernation chambers, there is no way to tell the difference between life and death. This may be the ultimate statement of man stripped of his humanity by his tools. Dave's voice breaking the silence is as shocking as an explosion in any other action movie. Hal can certainly hear Dave, but his silence suggests he hadn't expected Dave to return. Dave's unexpected plan and display of creativity and intelligence has taken Hal, the ultimate tool, off guard. Now, Hal isn't sure what to do next. In the novel, it was explained that Hal was caught in his own deceptions like an amateur criminal, and like any human, he panicked. That's certainly what's happening here, as he carefully chooses his words. Hal may be a tool who has evolved into a human being, but he's also discovering that mankind may still be evolving as well. The way Dave opens and closes his mouth without words here is an excellent example of direction by Kubrick, which we rarely see in movies these days because they depend on dialogue. Once again, Kubrick is using sound in an original fashion to add to the story. And so it appears Hal has won, and the tool is greater than mankind. But now is the moment of truth. where mankind has to evolve and prove to the universe, and especially to himself, that he can survive. Much like the Man Apes battling the others for the right to drink from their watering hole, this is the ultimate test, one in which Dave will either live or die. The next two scenes contrast each other, and together they build up into one of the most exciting and suspenseful sequences in all of movie history. Dave has to invent a way to survive without his tools, literally, without the space helmet designed to protect him against the vacuum of space. He absolutely has to find a solution using the tools he does have available, such as those explosive bolts marked in large letters on the door of the space pod. The first thing he does is abandon his friend, or you might say he's giving up the past. It's time to move forward to the future and leave the past behind. For the record, what Dave is doing here is not physically impossible. Science fiction movies have given many false ideas of what it's really like to be in outer space, and 2001 shatters those incorrect ideas here. In addition to there being no sound in a vacuum, it is indeed possible for a human to exist in a vacuum for a very short period of time, only seconds in length. Dave knows what he's doing is extremely dangerous, but it's not instantly fatal. And the build up to the coming explosion is, of course, a masterful use of sound to enhance the suspense of the moment. Who needs a musical soundtrack when you have this? and Hal has seen every moment of it. In contrast to the slow breathing that served to calm the audience during his routine spacewalk when the AE-35 unit was first removed, the sound here increases the tension of the situation. Dave has survived Hal's best attempts to kill him, and now it is Mann's turn to strike back against his tools. Incidentally, the reason why Dave is wearing a new space helmet while inside the Discovery is because during an earlier draft of the story, Hal let all the air out of the ship. Kubrick removed that detail from the final script, but it still shows Dave with a helmet here. 2 times before in the story of 2001, the movie has made reference to a birthday. Those scenes could be leading up to this moment when Dave bursts out of the space pod. In addition to the incredible suspense of the build-up to the exploding bolts, we could say that a birth has taken place. The womb of the space pod has ejected its newly born child into the cold environment of the universe, and indeed, Dave Bowman has been reborn. He is no longer a bored and pre-programmed individual shaped by his tools into an automaton. He's now on a quest to destroy the tool that he had depended on for so long, and to live completely on his own. As Dave works to disconnect Hal, his breathing increases, and we can feel his panic and his fear. But Hal is also frightened and panicking, though his programmed voice doesn't allow it to show here. The contrast between Dave's frightened and intense breathing and Hal's calm, monotone voice is still another use of sound in a unique manner. Among movie fans and conspiracy theorists, a lot of symbolism has been seen in the similarity between Hal's name and the computer IBM. It's known that the letters HAL are one letter forward in the alphabet from the letters IBM, and there have been comments suggesting this reference was intentional. But Kubrick and screenwriter and science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke always insisted this was just an interesting coincidence. However, Clarke did put a deliberate reference to IBM in Hal's death scene. In 1962, the first demonstration of synthesized computer speech was performed on an IBM computer in Urbana, Illinois, and this computer used its artificial voice to sing the song Daisy Bell. Arthur C. Clarke was in attendance there, and he was so impressed he included this in the screenplay for 2001. And as Hal becomes silent forever, a different voice is suddenly going to speak here, and that will be the pre-recorded message from Dr. Hayward Floyd. With that message, we realize at last the connection between the discovery of the monolith on the moon and the voyage to Jupiter. This, of course, is why Dr. Huntel, Kimball, and Kaminsky were trained separately and placed into hibernation, and this is what Hal had been hinting at in his conversation with Dave. They knew there was something out there, something that Dave and Frank had not known. Hal had known about the true purpose of the mission from the beginning, but he could not tell Dave about it. Now, I'd explained earlier in this commentary that Hal was aware of the true purpose of the mission from the beginning, and this was the cause of Hal's rebellion. There is one fascinating note about this sequence. Of all the messages and data stored in Hal's memory, it would be this particular message that's played when Hal passes away. Furthermore, a message of this sort would most likely be played over the regular monitors in the living quarters of the ship and not in Hal's central nervous system. The odds against this particular message being played in this area of the ship when Dave happens to be there for the first time are too great to be a mere coincidence. So we can only assume that Hal has played this message especially for Dave, so that even after all that's happened, the mission could continue. For Hal, the mission was everything. Even more than Hal's existence itself, the mission must continue. So, in a final act of faith, Hal reveals the true purpose of the mission, and Dave learns the truth at last. Now, Dave's return to Discovery and Hal's death are two of the most dramatic scenes of all time. But despite this, the question has been asked, just what does all this have to do with the movie? In the beginning, the Man Apes were taught to use tools by the Monolith. Then the Monolith appeared once again on the moon. But what do Hal's murders and subsequent death have to do with all this? As we've explained here, the answer is everything. The dawn of man had the ancestors of man learning to use tools, and the journey to the moon and the discovery of the monolith shows that man still uses tools and he is still dependent on them for his survival. Hal himself was just another tool. He kept the crew of the Discovery alive, and he maintained every facet of the ship's operations. But these tools have always threatened to destroy man as well. The Man Apes used their bone weapons to murder other Man Apes. Nuclear satellites orbited the Earth in the year 2001, and Hal, the most advanced of all man's tools, tries to murder his makers. But Dave has survived Hal's attempts to kill him and been reborn as something greater. And that proves man is indeed stronger than his tools. In this film, Hal's rebellion was Dave's baptism of fire, his ultimate test of intelligence. He has shown that man is resourceful enough to survive without tools. The Man Apes needed tools to survive, but man does not. He has evolved. He has indeed become an intelligent being able to exist on his own without any help from tools. Man is ready for the final step, and the makers of the monolith have been waiting for this moment for 4 million years. And now the final act begins. And now, at long last, the Discovery has arrived at Jupiter. And of course, the music we're hearing is, once again, Requiem by Ligeti. This music is played each time the monolith has appeared, and so we see the monolith once again as the Unearthly chorus sings. Each time the monolith has appeared before, an important event in human history occurred. The Man Apes learned to use tools, and later on the moon, mankind's presence was announced to the universe. From this we see another significant moment is imminent. Whatever happens here at Jupiter will have a lasting effect on human development. Dave now knows the true purpose of the Jupiter mission, and he knows what the other 3 crew members were going to do once they arrived here. But because everyone else is dead, the awesome responsibility of being man's first envoy to the unknown has fallen onto his shoulders. This is why we see Dave in the space pod traveling out into space. The novel explains Dave is going out to meet the Monolith in the hope that something will happen when he arrives. And it turns out he is exactly right. And presumably what we're seeing now is from Dave's point of view. A familiar sight appears on the screen once again, the magical alignment that indicates a landmark in human history. Jupiter and all of its moons are in conjunction, lining up in a straight row with the Monolith. And at this point, the entire structure of the film changes. Up until now, we've been following the standard pattern of plots, subplots, hidden meanings, and character development, and now all this is abandoned, and 2001 takes us to a realm uncharted in cinematic history. This progression of the lights and the vibrations, as well as the pressure on Dave's face, gives an unmistakable feeling of impossible speed. And every so often, flashes of Dave's face appear on the screen. He is obviously struck dumb by this sight. He was not totally unprepared for this, as he obviously would have been briefed on the Monolith by Mission Control, and certainly he thought he was ready for the unexpected. But now that he's actually experiencing alien technology firsthand, he's going into a state of shock. After all, no human being has ever gone through what Dave is going through now, and his instincts are not conditioned for this. For those wondering exactly what is happening here, the answer may be quite simple. The Monolith has taken Dave and the space pod out of the solar system, and it is bringing them across the universe to a new destination. This is the explanation offered by Arthur C. Clarke. In his novel, he provides a more detailed explanation of hyperspace and methods of faster-than-light travel used by the aliens, but exactly how the monolith works is really not important. After all, these are aliens at work here. Their ideas are not human, and they cannot be explained in human terms. Roger Ebert states that in some movies, a vague and unexplained setting such as this one may be necessary or indeed crucial because the story raises such complex questions that there simply is no easy solution. Meanwhile, the music changes from Requiem to Ligeti's Atmospheres, the same music that played during the prologue to 2001 and during the intermission. This would certainly not be a coincidence, as the purpose of this unusual cosmic piece is to create a mood and feeling in the audience, to give an impression of the universe, and to build on an atmosphere of mystery, which of course is explained in the title of the music. This vision of travel in unknown dimensions is the visual counterpart to Atmospheres. It's a cosmic mystery whose answers we can only guess at. Kubrick is once again using sound to complement the images of 2001. This scene is one of my favorite images from 2001, as it certainly suggests an alien technology is at work here, much like the monolith itself. We can't explain what these lights are, which I refer to as diamonds in the sky, and we certainly don't know why they're here. However, they do give us a bit of perspective, as we're now descending from space over what is apparently the landscape of an alien planet. The images we'll see in the next few minutes are those of alien landscapes, suggesting Dave may be nearing the end of his journey. Finally, the color changes from unearthly to normal. The image of Dave's eye becomes normal once again, and we realize that the space pod has stopped. We have reached our destination, but this is certainly not what we have been expecting at all. As the novel states, he was prepared, he thought, for any wonder. The only thing he had never expected was the utterly commonplace. We've entered the most alien surroundings possible, a hotel room that resembles a first-class hotel room on Earth. Being human, however, we can make an educated guess as to why this fancy room is there. Dave is put into familiar surroundings, at least familiar compared to the journey he's just taken, in order to comfort him. Indeed, Dave has suffered a great shock already. He's shaking and his hair has turned gray. The journey has obviously had a very traumatic effect. But of course, we certainly can't blame him for that. He's been taken away from everything that he has known and placed into this completely unknown place. Even the flashing instruments in the space pod read non-functional because all contact with the Discovery, and the known universe as well, has been broken, and there is nothing here that they are programmed to deal with. Thus, we have the Victorian room. It calms Dave down enough so that he can at least step out of the space pod and examine his new surroundings. Kubrick himself did state in an interview that Dave has been placed into a kind of cosmic zoo. He's being watched closely, and the sounds we're hearing right now might not be music, but the actual whispers of the aliens themselves as they watch his every move. The action takes place as Dave is seeing himself in the mirror. The mirror may suggest he's looking upon himself in the same way the aliens are and seeing how he has changed. It's also at this moment that something happens. A single click, which is enough of a sound to catch Dave's attention, and this is the moment where the transformation begins. This moment is a cinematic red herring, and it's possibly the most unexpected moment of the entire movie because Kubrick is actually breaking the fourth wall of cinema. We see Dave himself actually gazing upon the figure at the table, and when he turns from the table and looks directly at us, we have to assume he's approaching us and approaching Dave. But then, without any warning, Dave has simply disappeared, and this question is never completely answered. It's a bit of surrealism in film that simply can't be explained with the expected rules of filmmaking. But we must remember that Dave has been taken far from home, possibly even beyond time itself. When pondering the mystery of Dave's aging, we have to realize that we don't even know how much time Dave has spent there, in that room light years from Earth. He could have been there for a few minutes, or he could have spent the rest of his life there. The appearances of Dave Bowman as an older man here may be glimpses of himself at various times during his span here. And here, the motif of eating food occurs once again. This completes the cycle of food seen throughout the movie in many ways. First, Dave did not have to hunt this food himself, since it's obviously been provided for him by the creator of this room, and Dave seems to accept this fact as he eats. Unlike the raw meat of the Man Apes, this is an elegantly prepared meal. That in itself is seen with the way a glass shatters as Dave is eating. The glass has been compared to the Jewish tradition of breaking a glass at a Jewish wedding ceremony. It's a symbol of a great change occurring. Kubrick is Jewish, and this does make the comparison plausible, and so therefore, Dave Bowman is about to enter the next stage of his existence. But the exact question of how Dave achieves this transformation is not as important as the question of why. Why is he growing older? This question, fortunately, is much easier to answer because the entire film has been leading up to this point. Dave is growing older because he has finally reached the limits of his humanity. After being reborn during his trials with Hal, he is about to take the final step, the last transformation. And of course, when this happens, the Monolith is here to observe it. And just as his ancestors did, he reaches out to try to touch the Monolith. And with that, the transformation is complete. This is the successful conclusion of the mission of the Monolith, the birth of the Starchild. The previous birthdays seen in 2001 were precursors to this moment where mankind has at last been transformed. So what is the Starchild? No one can say for sure. He may be the final result of mankind's evolution, as he is as far removed from humanity as man was removed from the Man Apes. David Bowman has been taken to the next and maybe last level of existence. And this is the ultimate purpose of 2001, man's final destiny. The triumphant "Also sprach Zarathustra" echoes once more, and the planet Earth reappears. The Starchild has come home, back to the place where he was born. If the opening credits of the film were the point of view of the Starchild, then the Odyssey is complete, and we have come full circle. At the beginning, we were the Starchild looking at the Earth, but now we are the residents of Earth, and the Starchild is looking at us. One day, the movie declares, man will evolve to the point where he will be free at last. He will be unencumbered by any crude tools or physical forms, and he will at last take his place in eternity. And where shall we go from there? The answer to that can be found in the novel 2001: A Space Odyssey. And if there was anything beyond that, then its name could only be God. I hope you've enjoyed this commentary on Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Please feel free to look me up under my online name and website, Cast Iron Chaos. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.